On January 24th, 2023, Patrick Clancy returned to his Massachusetts home after picking up dinner and medicine for one of his children. He walked inside to a silent home, and upstairs he found blood on the floor, an open second-story window, and his wife Lindsay lying injured outside below. He ran outside to his wife, who was conscious, and asked her where their children were. She told him they were in the basement. Patrick ran back inside and then downstairs to the basement, where he found 5-year-old Cora, 3-year-old Dawson, and 8-month-old Callan with exercise bands around their necks. Lindsay Clancy had strangled all 3 of her children and then jumped from the second-story window in an apparent attempt to take her own life. 2 of the 3 children died that night, and Callan, the youngest, died 3 days later in the hospital. More than 3 years later, Lindsay Clancy is finally on trial for their murders, but not to determine if she actually killed them or not. Instead, the trial is to determine whether she can be held criminally responsible. This is Unreasonable Doubts, where we examine wrongful convictions and questions of criminal responsibility. To see more wrongful conviction content, please like and subscribe. This case is a little different than what we usually cover on this channel, and instead of diving into an explicit wrongful conviction case, we're going to cover criminal responsibility and how this is interpreted in state law. To do that, we need to go back several months before the killings. Lindsay was a labor and delivery nurse in Duxbury, Massachusetts, with her husband Patrick and their 3 children. Their youngest child, Callan, was born May of 2022. By that fall, Lindsay reported to her doctor that she had intense anxiety, she had problems sleeping, and she believed that she was depressed. She began receiving psychiatric treatment, and over the next several months, doctors prescribed and changed a number of different psychiatric medications to try to find something that worked out for her. Patrick, who again is Lindsay's husband, later testified that Lindsay began what he called her big spiral back in December of 2022, which was about 7 months after Callan was born. During this time, she lost weight, she became severely depressed, and she often talked about suicide. She even told Patrick at one point that she was experiencing thoughts about harming their children.
Did she also tell you at that time, at the beginning of December, that she was having some other intrusive thoughts?
Yeah.
Is that how she described them or how you described them, intrusive thoughts?
I would say both.
Okay. And when she told you that she was having intrusive thoughts, did you ask her what they were?
Yeah.
And what was her response?
She described thoughts of hurting the kids or them having some sort of ailment. So like she was very worried that Cora had, whenever she had a stomach ache, she became overly worried that she was, had like a liver problem or something much more dramatic than it was.
Okay. But going back to that first part, she said she had thoughts of harming the kids. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And did she tell you whether or not she had specific thoughts of how she would harm the kids?
No.
Around New Year's Day in 2023, so about a month after this big spiral started, she voluntarily entered McLean Hospital for psychiatric treatment and was discharged several days later. Dr. Alia Goodhart treated her there and would later testify that she diagnosed Lindsay with severe major depressive disorder, but specifically without psychotic features. Dr. Goodhart told the jury that she did not observe any signs of psychosis and did not believe Lindsay posed a danger to anyone else when she was discharged. Back on January 24th, 2023, Patrick was working from home that day while Lindsay was upstairs with the children. Lindsay and the kids spent a lot of the day together, they even played outside in the snow, and Patrick later testified that Lindsay seemed to be doing unusually well that day, and even described it as one of her best days.
At any point during that day when you came up or while she's texting you, did she tell you she was having suicidal thoughts?
No.
Did she tell you she was having thoughts of harming the kids?
No.
Did she ask for help or anything that caused concern?
No, she was having one of her best days.
One of her best days?
No.
That evening, Lindsay and Patrick discussed dinner, and Lindsay ordered takeout from a restaurant called 3V. When Patrick was leaving the house to go pick it up, Lindsay asked him to stop at a CVS to get medicine for one of the children. While Patrick was gone, Lindsay strangled Cora, Dawson, and Callan with exercise-resistant bands in the basement. She then went upstairs, cut her wrists, and jumped from the second-story window.
And then Exhibit 30. 37. Can you tell us what we're seeing here?
This is the back of the house and the window where Lindsay jumped out.
And Exhibit 38, is that a more direct view of that back of the house?
Yeah.
And so the window you referenced about Lindsay, is it this upper right top window?
Yeah.
Patrick returned home shortly afterward, where he found Lindsay outside, badly injured, and then went inside to look for the children. He found all three in the basement and called 911. Cora and Dawson died that night, while Callan was taken to the hospital and died several days later. Lindsay survived the fall, but suffered severe spinal injuries and is now paralyzed. Lindsay was later arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder for the killings of her 3 children. The trial started on July 27, 2026, in Plymouth Superior Court, Massachusetts. Lindsay's defense claims that, although she admits to killing her children, Massachusetts law must also prove that she was criminally responsible when she did it. Under Commonwealth law, a person is not criminally responsible for their conduct if they have a mental disease or defect, and, as a result of that mental disease or defect, lacks the substantial capacity either to appreciate the criminality or wrongfulness of their conduct, or to conform their conduct to the requirements of the law. Basically, what this means is that if a person doesn't understand that what they're doing is criminal because of some mental defect, then they can't be held criminally responsible for that action. Also, under this law, the Commonwealth holds the burden of proof, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the defendant was criminally responsible at the time of the crime. What this means is that basically it's the prosecutor's job to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Lindsay was criminally responsible for murdering her 3 children. However, this is still a difficult battle for the defense, because even by showing Lindsay's long history of mental illness, the medications that she was on, and even the psychiatric visits, none of those point to a psychotic episode, and mental illness in and of itself doesn't eliminate criminal responsibility. Even a diagnosis of postpartum psychosis wouldn't automatically help either, because the jury has to determine what she experienced at the moment she killed her children, not that she had experienced it in the past. Psychologist Paul Ziesel evaluated Lindsay extensively after the murders and testified that she suffered from bipolar disorder and postpartum psychosis, and was not criminally responsible for the killings. Another defense expert, forensic psychiatrist Dr. Philip Resnick, also testified that Lindsay was psychotic when she killed her children.
And at the time of the crime itself, on January 24, 2023, Ms. Clancy was frankly psychotic. So in that sense, she had a postpartum psychosis.
According to Resnick, Lindsay would describe experiencing a commanding voice and feeling as though an outside force had taken control of her body. He characterized this thinking as profoundly delusional, that in her distorted mental state, she believed killing her children would somehow protect them. However, the prosecution argues that Lindsay only described these commanding hallucinations after the killings, and never reported anything like this to any of her doctors. The doctors who were actually treating her before the murders didn't even document that kind of psychosis. Several even testified that they specifically didn't observe it during their treatment. And the prosecution also argues that Lindsay's behavior on the day she killed her children looks much more like planning than an uncontrollable psychotic break. They say she interacted normally with her family, she used her phone, she ordered dinner, she gave Patrick an errand to run at CVS, and she waited until he was gone to kill her children. The prosecutors argue that if this was a psychotic episode, that she wouldn't have been able to do all these things. And they even claim that her self-injury wounds on her wrists were superficial. The state's rebuttal psychiatrist, Dr. Avram Mack, also rejected the defense's bipolar diagnosis, and instead described Lindsay as suffering from major depression and anxiety without evidence supporting mania or psychosis. This is where the case has become so polarized with the public. The prosecution argues that Lindsay deliberately got her husband out of the house, waited until she was alone with the kids, carried out multiple killings, and even questioned whether her initial suicide attempt was even genuine. There's a clear prosecutorial argument that by planning this series of events, she understood exactly what she was doing. But planning is not actually the legal test in the Commonwealth. A person experiencing psychosis can still use a phone. They can drive a car, they can make dinner plans, they can make all kinds of decisions. The question is whether Lindsay's mental disease left her with the substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of the action she took that day. And this is all according to Massachusetts statute. So this creates an issue for the defense. Someone can be depressed or suicidal. They can experience intrusive thoughts or even experience a psychotic break and still be legally responsible for a crime. But can the prosecution prove beyond a reasonable doubt that whatever was happening inside of Lindsay's mind, she still had the substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of murdering her children? This case has sparked public calls for better understanding of postpartum mental illness, greater access to mental health resources, and greater awareness of just how severe postpartum psychosis can become. It occurs in about 1 to 2 out of every 1,000 births, and these often involve hallucinations, delusions, paranoia, and a profound break from reality. Anywhere from 1 to 4% of all of these cases result in infanticide, and Lindsay isn't the first mother accused of killing her children while allegedly experiencing postpartum psychosis. In fact, Dr. Philip Resnick, who was one of the expert witnesses I mentioned earlier, was the same witness who testified for the defense of Andrea Yates, who drowned her 5 children in Texas in 2001, which later resulted in a not guilty verdict by reason of insanity. There's one other possible misconception worth clearing up as well. If Lindsay is found not criminally responsible for killing her children, this doesn't mean she simply gets to just go home. Under Massachusetts law, Lindsay will most likely be committed to a state mental health facility. The initial term is 1 year, followed by additional 1-year commitments for as long as the state deems necessary. This means she could be confined in a facility for the rest of her life. But unlike a prison sentence, it's not based strictly on punishment for the crime. What happens is the court reviews her case, and if they believe she remains mentally ill and dangerous, then she'll never be released. So no matter what happens in the trial, Lindsay isn't simply facing a traditional outcome of prison or freedom, because her case isn't going to result in a guilty or not guilty verdict like we would see in most cases. Instead, it's going to be guilty or not criminally responsible, which is better known as not guilty by reason of insanity. This is not a traditional acquittal, and it's not an automatic ticket home. Lindsay would be committed to a state psychiatric hospital for an indefinite amount of time, which can last for the rest of her life. If that happens, the facility would most likely follow many practices of a normal prison. They have strict schedules, they have resource control, high security, and it certainly wouldn't be a life of comfort. So, although which punishment she deserves is pretty polarized, there's no scenario where Lindsay gets her freedom and then just goes home after the case. As of the making of this video, we don't know what's going to happen. Closing arguments are coming up next, and after that, the case will go to the jury. When the jury deliberates after closing arguments, the judge will most likely tell them that Lindsay doesn't have to prove that she was psychotic or prove that she wasn't criminally responsible. That burden remains with the Commonwealth. The jurors should consider everything they've heard. That includes Lindsay's medical records, what her doctors observed, what Patrick saw in the months before the killing, what she did on January 24th, what she said afterwards, and the competing opinions of all the experts involved. The jury can give those expert opinions as much or as little weight as they believe they deserve. Now, most of the cases we cover on this channel involve people who may have been wrongfully convicted. This case is a little different because we know that Lindsay did it. She did murder her children. She admitted to this, and she's not denying it. But it's whether the criminal justice system is correctly distinguishing between committing an act and being legally responsible for it. So for this case, our channel is really focusing on a lot of the similar things that we focus on in a wrongful conviction case. How the burden of proof is being applied, how jurors interpret expert testimony, and whether the legal standard is actually being followed. The unusual circumstances of this case have also produced online conspiracy theories, and one of the main ones being that Patrick actually killed the children and then framed his wife Lindsay. However, no part of this theory has been supported by the evidence, and neither the prosecution or defense team has even made claim to this. Again, as of the making of this video, we don't know what the jury will decide or how closing arguments are going to go. But when that verdict comes down, we'll have a better idea of how this jury interpreted Massachusetts state law. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to see more, please consider subscribing.